$73 should not have frightened a factory. But 3 weeks after Lottie Mae Bruner bought a rusted cotton gin fan for that exact amount, Bruner Textile Systems sent a company car down her gravel road before sunrise. The man who stepped out wore polished shoes, a wool coat, and a smile made for getting old women to sign before they read. In his hand was a cashier's check with the amount left blank. Lottie had bought the fan at a county auction because nobody else wanted it. Its blades were cracked. Its paint had burned away in patches. The hub looked sealed by rust and age. The auctioneer laughed when she asked if the center shaft came with it. Her son, Daniel, did not laugh. He looked ashamed. He knew she needed a working furnace, not 500 pounds of scrap metal from the factory where his father had died. The town thought grief had finally bent her mind. 40 years earlier, Eli Bruner had died inside that same cotton gin, and the official report said he ignored the warning signs. But Lottie had been a night nurse then. She remembered men coming in with torn sleeves, crushed fingers, and eyes that would not meet hers. She remembered the one word Eli whispered before he died. Guard. Now the factory wanted the fan back before anyone opened the shaft. Why would a company fear a $73 piece of junk more than the accident record it had buried for 40 years? Stay with Lottie Mae Bruner for this story. Some truths do not vanish just because a report says so. They wait inside rusted metal, sealed shafts, and the last word of a dying man. And sometimes, the old woman everyone laughs at is the only one still listening. The auction was held behind the county equipment barn on the first cold Saturday of October. A gray wind crossed the gravel lot, carrying the smell of diesel, wet leaves, and old iron. Men in canvas jackets stood around with coffee cups. Farmers came for fencing, contractors for trailers, and scrap haulers for heavy iron. Near the back fence sat the leftovers from the old Bruner cotton gin. Most of it looked dead. Cracked pulleys, dented guards, a motor casing with nothing inside it, and one enormous fan assembly lying on a warped pallet. Its blades were bent, the hub swollen with rust, the belt wheel frozen solid. To anyone else, it was 500 pounds of useless metal. To Lottie Mae Bruner, it was the only thing on that lot worth looking at. Wade Pike, the auctioneer, slapped the fan blade and grinned. "Now here's a beauty," he called. 500 pounds of regret. Who wants to start me at $20? A few men laughed. Lottie stood at the edge of the crowd in her faded green coat, white hair tucked beneath a knitted cap. Daniel stood beside her, arms crossed. "Mom," he said quietly, "we looked at heaters this morning." "I know. You said you were only coming to see the old place one last time." "I did. You didn't say anything about buying parts of it." Lottie did not answer. Her eyes stayed on the center shaft, where a ridge of old weld ran beneath the rust. Wade dropped the opening bid to $10. "Come on now," he said. $10. Less than a plate lunch. Somebody save me from hauling this monster off. A man near the front called, "You'd have to pay me to take it." The crowd laughed again. Then Lottie raised her hand. For a second, Wade Pike only stared at her. "Mrs. Bruner," he said. "You bidding on the fan?" "Yes." Daniel turned toward her, his face tightening. "Mom." Wade cleared his throat. "All right, $10 from Mrs. Bruner." "Do I hear 15? Ask if she wants the rust, too," someone said. "She can put it in the front yard," another man added. Lottie heard them, but kept her eyes on the shaft. "The scrap hauler bid once for amusement," Lottie answered. Wade pushed the number higher, smiling like it was entertainment. 15, 25, 40, 60. At $73, the scrap hauler shook his head. "Sold," Wade said, tapping his clipboard. "To Mrs. Bruner, for $73 and whatever prayer gets that thing off my lot." This time, the laughter was louder. Daniel leaned close, his voice strained. "The furnace still doesn't work. The roof is leaking over the back bedroom. You know what the bank said about another loan." "I know what they said." "Then why would you do this?" Before Lottie could answer, a man stepped out from beside a black company truck. His shoes were too clean for gravel, his wool coat too fine for a county auction. "Mrs. Bruner," he said. "Alden Voss, Bruner Textile Systems." Lottie looked at him once. "I know who you are. There may be some confusion. That assembly is industrial salvage. It presents a handling risk. The company can remove it for you at no charge." Wade chuckled. "That's generous, Mrs. Bruner. Saves you a headache." Daniel looked from Alden to the fan, then back at his mother. For one painful moment, Lottie saw herself through Daniel's eyes, an old widow spending winter money on dead machinery from the factory where his father had died. But Daniel had not seen the weld. He had not heard Eli's last word in the clinic 40 years earlier. Guard. Lottie opened her pocketbook and counted $73 into Wade Pike's hand. Then she took the receipt and folded it once. Alden watched too closely. "May I ask what interest you have in that particular fan?" he said. Lottie slipped the receipt into her coat pocket. "The center shaft comes with it," she asked Wade. Wade blinked. "What?" "The shaft," Lottie said. "The hub, the collar, everything still attached." Alden answered before Wade could. "There is nothing of use inside that shaft." The words came too fast. For the first time that morning, Lottie looked directly at him. Behind him, the old brick gin stood with boarded windows and a faded sign that still carried her married name. She placed one gloved hand on the rusted hub. "If that shaft is still sealed," she said, "then somebody lied." Nobody laughed after that. Not right away. Long before anyone in Bruner County laughed at Lottie May for buying a rusted fan, they had trusted her hands in the dark. She had been 29 when she started taking night shifts at the little clinic on Canning Road, a low brick building with 2 exam rooms, 1 rattling furnace, and a back door that opened toward the cotton gin. The gin stood less than half a mile away. On summer nights, when the windows were propped open with paint sticks, Lottie could hear the belts turning across the fields. The sound came in waves, a low mechanical breathing that seemed to rise from the earth itself. Most people in town were proud of that sound. It meant paychecks. It meant trucks lined up before dawn. It meant cotton moving, men working, families buying groceries on Friday. But to Lottie, the night sound of the gin always carried something else underneath it. A hitch, a scrape, a pause where no pause should have been. Eli Bruner heard it too. He was not an owner, though his last name made strangers assume things. The Bruner who had built the first gin was his grandfather's cousin, and whatever money had come from that branch of the family had passed far around Eli's side without stopping. Eli worked maintenance. He kept the belts aligned, the bearings greased, the guards tightened, and the old motors from shaking themselves loose. He came home with cotton dust in his eyebrows and oil pressed into the lines of his palms. He smelled of metal filings, work soap, and the peppermint candy he kept in his shirt pocket for Daniel. "Machines tell the truth before men do," he used to say. Lottie would smile from the kitchen sink. "And what are they telling you tonight?" "That somebody is asking too much from one that's already tired." He never said names at supper. Not with Daniel sitting at the table, swinging his short legs and building barns out of biscuit halves. But later, after their son was asleep, Eli would unfold scraps of paper from his pocket. Sometimes it was a sketch of a belt path. Sometimes a measurement. Sometimes a note written so small Lottie had to lean close to read it. "Fan line again?" she asked once. Eli nodded. The cotton gin's main fan line pulled dust, lint, and loose fiber away from the processing floor. When it worked right, men could breathe and see the warning stripes painted near the moving parts. When it ran too fast or without proper guarding, it turned the air mean. It pulled sleeves, gloves, loose cloth, and sometimes fingers toward places no human hand should ever go. Lottie knew that not because Eli explained it like a teacher, but because the men came to her clinic. They came after midnight with shirts wrapped around wrists. They came at 2 in the morning with faces white as flour. They came with crushed knuckles, torn sleeves, broken nails, and stories that changed depending on who was standing nearby. "Caught it on a crate," one man said, though there was cotton lint packed deep into the wound. "Dropped a pulley," said another, though the bruising ran in a circle around his wrist. A boy, no older than 19, once sat on the exam table with both boots swinging above the floor, trying not to cry while Lottie cleaned blood from his forearm. His supervisor stood by the door and answered for him. He wasn't watching where he put his hand. The boy looked at Lottie. Only once. Then he looked down. That was how she learned the language of fear. Not from screams, from silence, from men who would rather let shame settle on their own names than lose the job that fed their children. She began keeping her own notes. Not official clinic notes. Those belonged to Dr. Harlan and went into drawers that factory men sometimes asked to see. Lottie's notes went into a blue composition book she kept under flour sacks in the pantry. Date, time, injury, machine line if she knew it, supervisor present. Words the injured man said before someone corrected him. She did not think of it as evidence then. She thought of it as remembering. Eli found the notebook one winter evening while looking for a jar of peaches. For a moment, Lottie thought he would be angry. Instead, he sat down at the table, turned the pages with 2 careful fingers, and grew very still. "You wrote all this?" "I wrote what they wouldn't let themselves say." He closed the notebook and pushed it back toward her. "Keep writing." After that, something changed in him. He became quieter. Not colder, never that. Eli had a gentleness that even exhaustion could not sour. He still fixed Daniel's toy trucks with wire and patience. He still kissed Lottie's forehead before leaving for night calls. He still brought home bent nails, odd washers, and little brass pieces he said might be useful someday. But he started checking the kitchen window before speaking. He started burning some of his sketches in the stove. Once, Lottie woke after midnight and found him at the table with a butter knife, a salt shaker, and a rolled piece of brown paper. He had drawn a fan shaft in pencil. He used the knife to show where a seam could be hidden under a weld. "A man hides something like that," he said, "when he knows honest paper won't survive." "What kind of paper?" Lottie asked. Eli looked toward Daniel's bedroom. "The kind with signatures." She wanted him to tell her more, but marriage teaches a person the shape of a silence. This was not secrecy meant to wound her. It was fear trying to protect what it still could. The accident happened on a Thursday night in March. Rain had been falling since supper, hard enough to turn the road ditches silver. Lottie was on shift at the clinic when the gin whistle blew 3 short bursts, stopped, and then blew once more in a long, broken note. She knew before anyone came through the door. 2 men carried Eli in on a canvas tarp. There are moments that memory refuses to hold cleanly. Lottie remembered Dr. Harlan shouting for light. She remembered rainwater dripping from the brim of someone's cap onto the clinic floor. She remembered one of Eli's boots hanging loose because the laces had been cut. She remembered cotton dust on his eyelashes. She did not remember crossing the room, only being beside him. Eli's eyes opened once. They found her. His lips moved, but there was blood at the corner of his mouth, and the first sound was nothing but air. Lottie leaned close enough that her cheek touched his. "Don't talk," she whispered. "Save your strength." But Eli had never trusted silence when a truth needed saying. His hand moved against the sheet. One finger tapped twice, weakly, as if finding a rhythm only he could hear. "Guard," he breathed. Then again, softer. "Guard." By morning, he was gone. By noon, the factory had already written the story. The official report said Eli Brunner had entered a restricted area after ignoring safety warnings. It said the guard had been removed for routine maintenance and that Eli failed to follow procedure. It said no equipment defect was found. It said witnesses confirmed worker error. No one asked Lottie what Eli had said. No one asked about the men who had come bleeding through the clinic door. No one asked why a careful maintenance man would ignore the very warnings he had spent his life tightening into place. At the funeral, Hank Mercer, the floor supervisor, stood near the back under a black umbrella. Lottie saw him watching Daniel, who was small enough to believe death meant his father had simply gone somewhere too far to call home from. Hank did not come to the house afterward. He did not knock. He did not explain. So Lottie put his silence in the same drawer as the report, the same drawer as the folded flag from the factory memorial, the same drawer as every casserole dish brought by people who said Eli had been a good man but never said he had been innocent. Years passed. Daniel grew up under the weight of a story he had not chosen. At school, boys repeated what their fathers had said, that his daddy had made a mistake around a fan line and paid for it. Daniel learned to flinch before anyone said Brunner. Lottie tried to tell him there was more to it, but children need something solid to stand on, and the official report was printed, stamped, and signed. All Lottie had was one word from a dying man: guard. So she kept the blue notebook. She kept Eli's burned-looking scraps. She kept the memory of his butter knife tracing a hidden seam under a false weld. And when the old gin finally closed, when its machines were dragged out and laid on pallets behind the county equipment barn, Lottie went there not to say goodbye. She went to listen for the truth in the metal. Because machines, Eli had told her, spoke before men did. And 40 years later, one of them was still trying. By noon, the rusted gin fan sat in Lottie Mae Brunner's shed like a thing that had fallen out of another century. It had taken 2 men, Daniel's pickup, a rented chain, and more patience than anyone wanted to give it. The pallet cracked once when they lowered it. A rust scale flaked off the hub, and scattered across the floor like old brown snow. Daniel stood with one hand on his hip, breathing hard, while Lottie swept the pieces into a coffee can instead of throwing them away. "That is rust, Mom," he said. "I know what rust is. Then why are you saving it?" "Because sometimes rust tells you where water got in, and sometimes it tells you where it didn't." Daniel looked at her the way tired sons look at mothers they love but cannot follow. He had taken half a day off from the hardware store to help her haul home a machine he believed would never turn again. He had not complained when the chain slipped. He had not cursed when the pallet gouged the truck bed. But now, standing in the shed beside the thing, he seemed smaller than his 42 years. The fan filled the room with its uselessness. Its blades were wide and warped, each one curled slightly at the edge, as if heat had once reached them unevenly. The paint had been blue, maybe gray before that, but now most of it had burned or peeled away. Old cotton lint clung inside the ribbing where no broom had reached. The belt wheel on one side was frozen at an angle. A bright metal tag had once been riveted near the collar, but only 2 broken rivet heads remained. Daniel touched one blade with his boot. "You know what I see?" he asked. "I see furnace money. Roof money. Maybe 2 months of breathing room if you had let that scrap hauler take it." Lottie did not answer right away. She had set Eli's old work lamp on an upturned crate. Its yellow light fell across the center shaft, and that was where her eyes stayed. The shaft was thicker than she remembered from the line drawings Eli had once made at their kitchen table. Too thick near the hub. The collar had been built up with a heavy bead of weld that did not match the rest of the machine. Most repair welds were ugly in a certain honest way. This one was ugly with intention. She took off one glove and ran her bare thumb along the ridge. Daniel's voice softened. "Mom, I'm not trying to be cruel. I know. I just don't want you chasing him through old metal." That made her hand stop. For a moment, the shed held only the little ticking sound of the work lamp warming on the crate. Lottie looked at the fan, then at her son. Daniel had Eli's eyes, but not his memories. That had always been the hardest part. The lie had reached Daniel before the truth ever had a chance. "I'm not chasing your father," she said. "I'm looking where he pointed." Daniel looked away first. Lottie bent closer to the shaft. With a rag and a little kerosene, she cleaned one narrow section beneath the weld. Rust smeared red-brown across the cloth. More flakes came away. Underneath, a line appeared. Not a crack. A sem. It ran clean and shallow beneath the welded ridge, disappearing under the collar on one side and into packed grime on the other. Lottie breathed once through her nose, slow enough to steady herself. She moved the lamp closer. "There you are," she whispered. Daniel frowned. "What?" She did not answer. She took Eli's old awl from a drawer and scraped carefully around the collar. On the left side, beneath a clot of grease hardened almost black, 3 marks showed through. "B. to bless." Not stamped like a serial number. Cut by hand. Lottie sat back on her heels. She had not seen those marks in 40 years, but she knew them. Eli had used letter and number codes when he drew machine sections at the kitchen table. B meant blower line. 17 meant the fan position closest to the south intake, the one men passed when they carried cotton waste out through the side bay. The official report had never named fan B17. It had only said main ventilation assembly. That had always bothered her, though she had never known why. Factories named machines when they wanted maintenance done. They made things vague when they wanted responsibility to disappear. Daniel crouched beside her despite himself. "Could be anything," he said. "It could. But you don't think it is." "No. Because Dad wrote codes like that? Because your father did not waste marks." Before Daniel could answer, the telephone rang inside the house. The sound reached the shed through the cracked back door, sharp and ordinary, but Lottie felt her body tighten as if someone had stepped behind her. Daniel stood first. "I'll get it." "No," Lottie said. She rose slowly, wiping her hands on a rag, and went into the kitchen. The phone sat on the wall beside the bread box. She lifted the receiver. "Mrs. Bruner?" said a smooth voice. "Alden Voss, Bruner Textile Systems. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time." Lottie looked through the kitchen window toward the shed. Daniel stood in the doorway, watching her. "What do you want, Mr. Voss?" "I wanted to follow up regarding the fan assembly you purchased this morning. After reviewing our disposal records, it appears that item should have been removed by an authorized industrial contractor. We're concerned about liability." "Liability?" Lottie repeated. Yes. Sharp edges, lead-based paint, possible contamination, improper handling risk. We would be willing to reimburse your purchase price, of course, and cover removal at no expense. You reviewed disposal records already? A small pause. That is standard procedure. For a $73 fan. Another pause, shorter this time. Mrs. Bruner. Old factory equipment can be dangerous when misunderstood. Lottie looked at the coffee can of rust flakes on the table. Then at the shed. Then at the place on her thumb where the old seam had left a red line. I agree, she said, especially when the wrong people understood it first. Alden's voice cooled by half a degree. I'm not sure what you mean. No, Lottie said. I don't suppose you are. She hung up before he could offer more politeness. Daniel stepped into the kitchen. Was that him? Yes. What did he say? That the fan is dangerous. Well, he's right. No, Lottie said. He said it too soon. Daniel started at her. Lottie went back to the shed and stood over the fan again. The thing looked no less broken than before. Still rusted, still heavy, still ridiculous to anyone who had not learned how fear hid inside official language. But now she had 3 facts. The shaft had a seam, the collar had been sealed, and Bruner Textile Systems knew enough to call her before the day was over. Lottie opened the drawer beneath Eli's old workbench and took out a small paper packet wrapped in waxed cloth. Inside was the awl, 2 worn files, and a brass caliper Eli had used until the numbers nearly vanished from its face. She placed them beside the hub. Daniel watched from the doorway. You're not going to try to open that thing yourself. Lottie looked at the sealed shaft. No. For the first time all day, Daniel looked relieved. Then she said, I'm going to take it to someone who knows why a man would weld a secret shut. And by dusk, she was thinking of Earl Maddox, the one retired machinist in Bruner County who had once worked the gin floor and never spoke Eli's name without lowering his eyes. Lottie waited until Daniel left for the hardware store before she tried the shaft. She did not do it because she wanted to hide things from her son. She did it because love had made Daniel practical, and practicality had a way of sounding like surrender. He would see the fan's weight, her age, the weak boards under the shed floor, the furnace that still coughed cold air through the house, and he would ask the question any decent son would ask. Was a dead man's word worth a living woman's bones? Lottie already knew her answer. She laid Eli's tools on a folded feed sack beside the fan, the brass caliper, 2 files, a short-handled wrench, a small hammer, and the awl she had used to clean the seam. Then she brought out the kerosene, a wire brush, and the old jack Daniel kept for changing truck tires. The shaft did not move. Not a breath. She brushed rust from the collar until her wrists ached. She worked the file along the weld ridge and managed only to brighten one thin scratch. She set the jack against the pallet frame and tried to lift the hub enough to slip a block beneath it, but the pallet groaned so loudly she stopped. The fan seemed to settle deeper into the shed floor, as if the old factory had sent one of its roots into her home and dared her to pull it free. By the time Daniel came back, Lottie was sitting on an overturned bucket with one hand wrapped in a dish towel. There was blood at the base of her thumb. Daniel saw it before he saw the tools. What happened? It slipped. What slipped? The wrench. His face changed in the way it had when he was a boy and found a bill on the kitchen table with red print across the top. Fear first. Anger second, because anger was easier to hold. You said you weren't going to open it yourself. I said I was going to take it to someone who knows why a man would weld a secret shut. And before that, you decided to fight it alone? I only cleaned around the collar. You're bleeding. It's a scrape. You are 76 years old. Lottie looked up at him. I had noticed. That is not funny. No, she said. It isn't. Daniel stood over the fan, breathing through his nose. He was not a cruel man. That was what made the argument hurt. Cruelty could be dismissed. Worry had weight. It came carrying facts. The furnace still needed repair. The roof still leaked. The bank had already said no. And now there was blood on a towel because Lottie had put her hand where a younger man should have put his. Daniel picked up the awl and held it out. This is not evidence, he said. It is a sharp piece of metal. Lottie took it from him gently. No, she said. It is where evidence begins. By evening, half the county had improved the story. At Callie's market, someone said Lottie Bruner had bought the fan to build a shrine to Eli. At the barber shop, someone said she was trying to prove the factory murdered him. At the diner, Wade Pike told 3 men that she had asked whether there were ghosts inside the shaft, which was a lie, but a profitable one. People liked grief better when they could make it strange. It kept them from asking what their own fathers had ignored. Daniel heard the talk before Lottie did. He came home with 2 grocery bags, and a silence so tight it made the kitchen feel smaller. "They're laughing again," he said. "They laughed this morning. This is different. It usually is when they have time to decorate it." He set the bags on the counter. "Mom, they're saying you're losing your mind." Lottie put a kettle on the stove. "Then they should be relieved I only spent $73. Daniel did not smile. Before supper, a courier left an envelope on the porch. It was thick, cream-colored, and addressed to Mrs. Lottie M. Bruner in a typed font, so stiff it looked unfriendly before she opened it. Daniel stood beside her while she read. Bruner Textile Systems formally requested that she cease any attempt to dismantle, alter, transport, inspect, cut, heat, open, or otherwise disturb the industrial fan assembly purchased at county disposal auction. The letter claimed possible contamination, proprietary design, unsafe handling, and improper release of company property. At the bottom was the name Celia Frame, legal counsel. Daniel read it twice. "They can sue you," he said. "They can threaten to. That is not a small difference when you don't have money for a lawyer." Lottie folded the letter along its original crease. The first call had been polite. This was not. That meant the seam mattered. The next morning, she asked Daniel to drive her to Earl Maddox's machine shop. He refused at first. Then he saw her trying to drag the portable hoist from the shed by herself and took the truck keys from the hook without another word. Earl Maddox's shop sat behind a closed feed mill on County Road 6. The sign over the door still read Maddox Mackin and Repair, though Earl had not taken regular work in nearly 8 years. He was thin now, bent at the shoulders, with white stubble on his jaw, and eyes that looked permanently narrowed from decades of reading metal shavings in bad light. When Daniel backed the truck to the shop door, Earl stepped out, wiping his hands on a rag. "If that's farm equipment, I'm retired." "It isn't farm equipment," Lottie said. Earl looked past her into the truck bed, his face closed. "No." She had not asked yet. Daniel noticed too. "You know what it is?" Earl threw the rag onto a bench. "I know what it came from. I need you to look at the shaft," Lottie said. "No. You need to take it back where you found it. The company wants it back. That ought to tell you something." "It does." Earl's mouth tightened. He glanced toward the road, though no one had followed them. "Lottie, I am too old to be dragged into Bruner business. Suwangi, that place swallowed men who were stronger than both of us. It swallowed Eli." Earl looked down. For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of his shop heater and a crow calling from the feed mill roof. Then Lottie pulled the folded legal notice from her coat pocket and handed it to him. Earl read the first page, then the second. When he reached Celia Frame's name, he made a small sound in his throat. "They moved fast," he said. "Too fast." He gave the fan another look, longer this time. Not at the blades, not at the frozen belt wheel. At the collar. Lottie climbed into the truck bed slowly and pointed to the weld ridge. "I cleaned enough to find the seam, and this." She showed him the hand-cut mark. "Bay, to du blus." Earl did not touch it at first. He leaned closer. His eyes moved across the weld, then back to the mark, then to the collar, where the metal had been built up heavy and uneven. He reached into his shirt pocket for a pair of old glasses and put them on with both hands. Daniel waited near the tailgate, arms folded, but he no longer looked angry. Earl ran one finger just above the weld without touching it. "Who tried to open this?" he asked. "I did." "Don't." "I know." "No," Earl said, turning to face her. "You don't. If there's paper in there and you heat it wrong, you'll cook it. If you cut it wrong, you'll shred it. If you pry it wrong, whatever somebody hid will look like trash before you know what it was." Daniel looked at Lottie. "Paper," he said. Earl ignored him. He bent closer to the hub, took a small pick from his bench, and scraped once beneath the weld line. A curl of rust lifted. Under it was a faint line of older metal, protected from air for decades. Earl went still. Lottie felt her own heartbeat move into her throat. "Well?" she asked. Earl removed his glasses. For the first time since they arrived, he said Eli's name. "Eli didn't weld like this." Lottie gripped the side of the truck bed. "Then who did?" Earl looked toward the closed feed mill, then down the empty road, then back at the sealed shaft. I don't know who held the torch, he said. But that is not a repair. He tapped the air above the collar, careful not to touch the seam again. That is a seal. Daniel's arms slowly fell to his sides. And in the quiet that followed, Lottie understood two things at once. Her first attempt had failed, but the fan had finally spoken loudly enough for someone else to hear. Earl Maddox would not let anyone touch the shaft for 3 days. Not Lottie, not Daniel, not himself, at first. He kept the fan inside his shop with a tarp over the blades and a chain around the pallet, as if a 500-pound piece of dead factory iron might try to run if left alone. Each morning, he lifted one corner of the tarp, studied the collar, then lowered it again without speaking. Daniel thought the waiting was useless. Lottie understood it. Earl was not afraid of the metal. He was afraid of what careless hands could do to whatever waited inside it. On the third afternoon, he set out his tools with the slow care of a man preparing surgery. No torch, no grinder, no saw, only penetrating oil, a brass brush, a dental pick, a magnifying glass, cotton cloth, and a small lamp with a narrow beam. If Eli hid paper in there, Earl said, heat is the enemy. Daniel stood near the workbench. You keep saying paper. Earl did not look up. Because men don't seal empty air. He worked along the weld ridge 1 inch at a time. The shop smelled of oil, dust, and old iron. Rust came away in fine red flakes. The first line they had seen in Lottie's shed became clearer, running beneath the weld like a river under ice. Then Earl stopped. Lottie, he said. She stepped closer. Under the collar, where the rust had protected the metal from light and air, a set of shallow cuts appeared. Not factory stamping. Not a serial plate. Hand marks, made by someone who wanted them hidden but not lost. E. B. Guard line, do not scrap. For a moment, no one moved. Daniel read it once. Then again. E. B. He said quietly. Lottie's hand found the edge of Earl's bench. The letters were small, uneven, and cut with the kind of tool a maintenance man could carry in his pocket. Eli had not written his whole name. He had not needed to. E.B. was enough if the right person ever came looking. Guard line, do not scrap. Lottie felt 40 years fold inward until the clinic room, the rain, the canvas tarp, and Eli's broken whisper all stood beside her in Earl's machine shop. Guard, Daniel swallowed. Could somebody else have done that? Yes, Earl said. The answer hit Lottie harder than denial would have. Earl looked at Daniel. But not many, and fewer are that way. Daniel stared at the cuts. His anger had not disappeared, but it had lost its footing. For the first time since the auction, he looked at the fan as if it might be something other than a burden his mother had dragged home from grief. Lottie saw it happen. A small shift, not belief, but doubt in the lie. Earl rubbed one thumb along his jaw. I can open it, but not today. Why not? Daniel asked. Because now it is evidence. That word changed the air. Evidence did not belong to widows and old machinists alone. Evidence invited lawyers, reporters, courts, men with clean shoes and company letterhead. Evidence could protect a truth, or it could be stolen before anyone understood its value. Lottie was about to answer when Earl's shop phone rang. Nobody moved at first. Earl picked it up on the 4th ring. Maddox machine. His face changed before he said another word. He listened. Then his eyes went to Lottie. When? Another pause. Which line? He hung up slowly. Daniel stepped forward. What happened? Earl took off his glasses. Bruner's new processing plant shut down this morning. Lottie felt the bench under her fingers. Why? Fan failure on the south intake line. Young man got his sleeve pulled into the housing. They got him loose, but his arm's bad. Daniel looked from Earl to the old shaft. South intake, he said. Nobody had to explain the echo. The old gin. Fan B17. South intake. Now the new plant. Same place in the system. Same kind of injury. Same language returning after 40 years. Only wearing new paint. That evening, Alden Voss came to Lottie's house in person. He did not bring Celia Frame. He did not bring a truck. He came alone, which made the visit feel less official and more dangerous. He stood on Lottie's porch with his wool coat buttoned, a leather folder under one arm, and mud on the edges of his polished shoes. Daniel opened the door but did not invite him in. Alden smiled past him. Mrs. Bruner, I was hoping we might resolve this before misunderstandings become expensive. Lottie stood behind Daniel. What kind of misunderstandings? The kind created when old grief is mistaken for technical knowledge. Daniel's shoulders tightened. Alden opened the folder and removed a check. "This is a goodwill offer," he said. "More than fair. Enough to cover the fan, removal, inconvenience, and certain home repairs I understand may be pressing." He placed the check on the porch rail. Daniel looked at the number and went still. Lottie did not. She looked at Alden's hand. It trembled once before he pulled it back. "You heard about the injury," she said. Alden's smile thinned. "Industrial work carries risk. So does lying about guards." The porch went quiet. For half a second, Alden forgot to look polite. That was the first real sign. Not the money, not the letter, not even the marks under the shaft collar. It was his face when she said the word guards. Lottie picked up the check, folded it once, and handed it back. "Tell Brunner Textile," she said. "The fan is not for sale." Alden looked at Daniel then, not Lottie. "Your mother is putting your home at risk." Daniel's eyes moved to the check, then to his mother, then to the road beyond Alden's shoulder. For a moment, Lottie thought fear would take him back. But Daniel opened the door wider and said, "You should leave." Alden's face hardened. He slipped the check into his folder. "This will not stay simple," he said. Lottie nodded. It stopped being simple 40 years ago. When Alden walked back to his car, Daniel did not speak until the engine faded down the road. Then he turned to his mother, and for the first time, his voice was not angry. "What did Dad know?" Lottie looked toward the dark line of Earl Maddox's shop beyond the fields, where the sealed shaft waited under a tarp. "I think," she said, "we're finally close enough to find out." Earl Maddox opened the shaft on a morning so quiet that even Daniel stopped asking questions. The shop doors were closed, the radio stayed off. Earl had cleared the workbench of everything except a lamp, clean cloth, a shallow tray, a notebook, and 3 tools Lottie had never seen him use before. One was a narrow brass wedge, one was a hand vise with padded jaws. The last was a thin hook no larger than a sewing needle. "This is not repair work," Earl said. Daniel stood beside Lottie, arms folded but no longer defensive. "Then what is it?" Earl adjusted the lamp so its light fell across the weld line. "Recovery." That word settled over them. Recovery meant something had survived. Earl had spent the night softening rust around the sealed collar with oil, never heat. Now the weld ridge looked less like a single lump of corrosion and more like a scar with edges. He did not cut across it. He worked beneath it, easing the brass wedge into the seam one breath at a time. The metal complained. A small sound came from inside the shaft. Daniel stepped forward. "Was that bad?" "No," Earl said, though sweat had gathered near his temple. "That was old pressure letting go." Lottie held the edge of the bench. She had waited 40 years. Now each second seemed too fast. Earl turned the wedge again. A thin crack opened beneath the collar. Rust fell into the tray. Then, with a dull click, a short section of the welded sleeve shifted loose. Nobody spoke. Earl lifted the piece away and laid it on the cloth. Inside the shaft was darkness. Not empty darkness. Protected darkness. Earl took the hook and reached in with the care of a man removing a splinter from an eye. He touched something. Stopped. Changed angle. Tried again. A small metal tube slid out half an inch. Lottie's knees weakened before she knew why. The tube was no longer than her hand. It had been wrapped in oiled cloth and sealed at both ends with wax that had turned nearly black. No gold fell out. No cash. No deed. Nothing that would make a greedy man smile at first glance. Just a tube. Daniel stared at it. All this for that? Earl did not. He carried the tube to the bench and cut the old wax with a razor so thin it barely made a sound. The cloth peeled back slowly. Underneath, the metal had stayed almost clean. Earl opened one end and tipped it gently. A roll of paper slid into his palm. It was stiff with age, but not ruined. The oil had preserved it. The edges were brown. The fold lines were fragile. Earl did not unfold it with his fingers. He used the flat of 2 clean rulers, easing it open inch by inch until the drawing spread across the workbench. For several seconds, Lottie did not understand what she was seeing. Then the lines found names. Fan Housing Assembly. South Intake Guard. B-17 Airflow Revision. Brunner Textile Systems. Original Safety Specification. Daniel leaned closer. South Intake Guard. Earl nodded once. "There it is," he said. The blueprint showed the fan assembly in clean black lines. The center shaft, the housing, the belt wheel, the intake mouth, and around the dangerous opening, drawn with careful measurements and cross-hatching, was a curved metal guard that did not exist on the fan lying in Earl's shop. Lottie's hand rose to her mouth. Eli had not imagined it. He had not misunderstood the machine. He had not ignored a warning. The warning had been removed. Earl pointed to a note near the lower right corner. Guard required during operation. Removal voids safety clearance. Daniel read it silently. Then he read it again, slower. His face changed, not all at once. It happened in pieces. First confusion, then resistance. Then something that looked almost like shame, though Lottie knew it was not shame for himself. It was the pain of realizing he had spent his whole life standing on a report that might have been built to sink under him. They said Dad went past the guard, he said. Lottie nodded. Daniel looked at the fan. But there wasn't one. No, Earl said. Not on this assembly. Daniel's jaw tightened. Then the report lied. Earl did not answer. He did not need to. Lottie bent over the blueprint, searching for Eli's name. She found it near a revision box at the bottom. E. Bruner Maintenance Review. Her vision blurred. Not because it was enough, because it was real. For 40 years, Eli had existed in the town's memory as a careful man who made one fatal mistake. Now, in the quiet of Earl Maddox's shop, his own initials sat beside a warning the factory had erased. Lottie touched the paper near his name, not on the ink, but close enough to feel the air above it. Eli, she whispered. Earl turned the blueprint slightly. There's more. Lottie looked where he pointed. Beside Eli's initials, in a different hand, was another signature. H. Mercer Floor Supervisor. The room seemed to tilt. Daniel looked up. Mercer? Lottie did not speak. She saw a black umbrella at Eli's funeral. A man standing near the back, watching Daniel from under the brim. Hank Mercer, the supervisor who had not come to the house. Hank Mercer, who had never said Eli was right. Hank Mercer, whose silence Lottie had filed beside the official report, the factory flowers, and every lie dressed up as sympathy. Her voice came out thin. No. Earl said nothing. Lottie stepped back from the bench. No, she said again, harder this time. He signed the report against Eli. Earl removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He signed something, he said, but maybe not only that. Lottie looked at him. You knew? I knew Hank was scared after Eli died. That is not an answer. No, Earl said. It's all I had. Daniel looked between them. What does his signature mean? Lottie stared at the blueprint until the lines blurred. All these years, she had needed the world to be simple enough to hate. Eli had warned them. The factory had buried it. Hank Mercer had helped bury him. But the paper on the bench refused to stay inside that shape. If Hank had signed the blueprint, then he had seen the guard requirement before the accident. If Hank had seen it, he had known the report was false. And if he had helped hide the blueprint in the fan shaft, then his silence had not been the whole story. That was what shook Lottie most. Not that the factory had lied. She had known that in her bones. It was that one of the men she had hated for 40 years might have carried a piece of the truth and been too afraid, too weak, or too ashamed to bring it to her. Earl covered the blueprint with a clean sheet of glass to keep the corners flat. This is enough to bring lawyers, Daniel said. It is enough to bring worse than lawyers, Earl answered. Lottie looked at Eli's initials. Then at Hank Mercer's. The fan had finally opened. But instead of giving her the clean answer she had prayed for, it had handed her a harder question. Who had really sealed the truth inside B-17? And why had Hank Mercer let her bury him as a coward for 40 years if he had once tried to help? Celia Frame arrived at Earl Maddox's shop with Alden Voss at 9 o'clock the next morning. She did not look like a woman who had come to argue. She looked like a woman who had already won and was only stopping by to explain the terms. Her gray suit had no wrinkle in it. Her hair was pinned tight. She carried a leather case in one hand and a folder in the other. Alden stood half a step behind her. That told Lottie something. Men like Alden only let someone else stand in front when the smile had stopped working. Earl met them at the shop door. Private property. Celia looked past him toward the tarp-covered fan. So is the material inside that machine. Daniel, standing beside Lottie, stiffened. Celia opened her folder. Mrs. Bruner. Bruner Textile Systems has reason to believe that a proprietary design document was unlawfully removed from company possession approximately 40 years ago, and concealed inside equipment later released. Lottie said nothing. Celia continued. If such a document exists, it remains company property. Any attempt to copy, distribute, alter, display, publish, or use it in a legal claim would expose you and anyone assisting you to civil liability. Earl gave a dry laugh. That's a lot of words for, we're scared. Celia did not look at him. It is a lot of words for do not make an old tragedy worse. That struck Daniel harder than it struck Lottie. She felt him move beside her. Celia noticed too. Mr. Brunner, she said, softening her voice. Your mother may not understand what this could cost. You do. Your name appears on the refinance documents for her home, does it not? Lottie turned. Daniel's face had gone pale. He had never told her the full terms. She knew he had helped after her roof damage 2 years earlier. She knew he had signed something with the bank when her pension and clinic savings were not enough, but she had not understood that his name, his credit, his own small future, was tied to the house in a way Celia could now pull like thread. Alden finally spoke. No one wants your mother hurt. Daniel looked at him. Then why do you keep threatening her? Because she is holding something she does not legally own, Celia said. The words landed in the shop like a dropped tool. Lottie looked toward the bench where the blueprint lay under glass. Something in her tightened. She had spent 40 years believing Eli's truth had been stolen from him. But if Celia was right about one thing, even one narrow thing, then Eli had taken company paper and hidden it in company machinery, maybe for a righteous reason, maybe because no honest drawer would keep it safe. But the law did not always care why a hand reached for evidence. For the first time since the shaft opened, doubt entered from a different door. Not doubt that Eli was innocent, doubt about what the truth might cost the living. Celia placed a document on Earl's bench. This is a preservation demand and notice of ownership. We expect the fan assembly and any contents to be surrendered by Friday at 5. Earl did not touch it. Lottie did. She folded it once and put it in her coat pocket. Celia's mouth tightened. You have been warned. No, Lottie said. I have been hurried. Celia closed her case. Alden looked at Daniel again before leaving. Your mother is turning grief into a lawsuit. Daniel did not answer. That afternoon, he drove without speaking. Lottie sat in the passenger seat with Celia's notice in her lap and the weight of Daniel's hidden sacrifice between them. The road to Willow Creek Rest Home ran past the old cotton fields, past the boarded gin, past the place where trucks used to line up so deep in harvest season that men slept in their cabs. Hank Mercer lived in room 214. The nurse at the front desk said he had good mornings and bad mornings. This one, she warned, was somewhere in between. They found him in a wheelchair by the window, wrapped in a brown cardigan, his hands folded over a blanket. He was smaller than Lottie remembered. That angered her before she could stop it. For 40 years, Hank Mercer had stood in her mind as a large man under a black umbrella, a man with a supervisor's voice and the power to tell the truth, but not the courage. Now he looked like a pile of old bones waiting for permission to leave. His eyes moved when she said his name. Hank. At first, nothing. Then his gaze sharpened, just a little. Lottie Brunner, he said. Daniel looked surprised that the old man knew her. Lottie stepped closer. You remember me. Hank's mouth worked once before sound came. Some people a man remembers because he did right by them. He swallowed. Some because he didn't. Lottie took the folded copy of the blueprint from her purse. Earl had made only one copy, on Daniel's phone at first, then printed it because Lottie did not trust a truth that could disappear behind a dead battery. She unfolded it and placed it on Hank's lap. His hands began to shake before his eyes reached the signatures. When they did, his face collapsed. Not dramatically, not like a man performing remorse. It was smaller than that. Worse than that. His mouth opened, but no words came. One hand crawled across the paper until it found Eli's initials. Then it moved to his own. Hank, Lottie said, why is your name on this? He closed his eyes. Daniel leaned forward. Did you sign the report too? Hank's eyes opened. He looked at Daniel for a long time. You're the boy. I'm his son. Hank made a sound that might have been a laugh if it had not broken halfway through. Eli said you liked peppermint. Daniel went still. Lottie felt that small detail cut through the room. Not because it proved innocence. Because it proved Hank had known Eli as more than a line in a report. Hank, she said again, harder now. Why was the blueprint in the fan? The old man looked down at the paper. his thumb pressed against the revision bar. He told me, Hank whispered, not to let them melt B-17. Lottie's breath caught. Who told you? Hank looked at her then. Not at Danielle. Not at the paper. At her. Elle. The room seemed to lean toward that name. Hank's voice thinned. He said if the file disappeared, the machine had to remember. Lottie gripped the rail of his bed. And you let me believe he died careless. Hank's face crumpled. No, he said. I let you believe worse. Daniel stepped back, as if the air had changed. Lottie wanted to demand the whole truth right there. She wanted names, dates, signatures, the exact sentence Hank had spoken when men from the company came with their polished shoes and prepared report. She wanted to throw 40 years of silence at him until something broke. But Hank Mercer was already breaking. The nurse appeared in the doorway. Mr. Mercer needs rest. Lottie did not move. Hank's hand closed weakly around the edge of the blueprint copy. Come back, he said. When? His eyes drifted toward the window, where the old gin's smokestack could just be seen above the trees. Tomorrow, he whispered, before I forget how to be a coward. Lottie folded the copy and put it back in her purse. Outside, Daniel did not start the truck right away. For the first time, he looked shaken not by his mother's stubbornness, but by the size of the thing that had been kept from them. What did he mean? Daniel asked. The machine had to remember. Lottie looked toward Earl's shop in the distance, where the real blueprint waited under glass. I think, she said, your father knew paper could be stolen. Then she looked back at the rest home window. And I think Hank knows who stole it. Lottie returned to Willow Creek Rest Home the next morning with Daniel beside her and Celia Frame's deadline folded in her coat pocket. Friday at 5. The words had followed her through the night. They had sat at the foot of her bed while the furnace clicked and failed to catch. They had waited in the kitchen while she made coffee she barely drank. They had followed her into Earl Maddox's shop, where the blueprint lay under glass like something too fragile and too dangerous to breathe near. Now they followed her into room 214. Hank Mercer was awake. The nurse had shaved him. His cardigan had been buttoned crookedly. A paper cup of water sat untouched on the tray beside his chair. He looked older than he had the day before, as if remembering had cost him more than sleep. When he saw Lottie, he did not ask why she had come. He looked at Daniel first. Then, at the folded copy of the blueprint in Lottie's hand. They gave you a deadline, he said. Lottie stopped near his chair. You knew they would. Hank's eyes moved to the window. Far beyond the trees, the old gin smokestack cut a dark line against the morning sky. They always did like clocks, he said. Deadlines, shift bells, production counts, accident windows. They could turn a man's life into a number and call it management. Daniel pulled a chair closer for his mother. Lottie did not sit. Hank, she said, tell it plain. The old man nodded once. Plain was harder than confession. He began with the guard. The south intake line had been changed during a high-output season. The year cotton prices rose, and the factory owners promised bonuses if the gin could move more bales per shift. The original fan design had a curved metal safety guard around the intake mouth. It slowed lint buildup. It made cleaning take longer. It forced shutdowns when fiber packed too tight around the housing. So management called it inefficient. They removed it first for temporary maintenance. Then they ran the line without it. Then the temporary condition became normal. Men complained, Hank said. Not loudly. Nobody complained loudly in those days if they had children. But they complained. Sleeves pulled. Gloves caught. One man lost 2 fingers and signed a paper saying he reached past a warning rail. There was no rail? Daniel asked. Hank shook his head. There had been. That was how they wrote it. They kept the words after they took away the thing. Lottie felt that sentence enter her like cold water. They kept the words after they took away the thing. Warning rail, safety guard, restricted area, worker error. A whole language built around objects that no longer existed. Hank coughed, and Daniel gave him the water. He drank, with both hands shaking. Eli found the revision copies, Hank continued. He knew the production drawings had changed. He wrote a maintenance objection. He said if they wanted more speed, they had to redesign the housing, not strip the guard. He put his initials on the review. I signed because I was floor supervisor, and because he was right. Lottie stared at him. Then why did you sign the report? Hank closed his eyes. For a moment, she thought he would retreat into age, into confusion, into the mercy of not remembering. But when his eyes opened, they were wet and clear. Because I was a coward with a mortgage. The room went still. They told me Eli had entered the line after shutdown. They told me the company lawyers already had statements. They told me if I contradicted the report, they would say I authorized unsafe work. They said my boys would watch me lose everything over a dead man I couldn't bring back. His mouth twisted, and I let them make that sound like wisdom. Daniel's jaw tightened. You let my father take the blame. Yes. The answer was so bare that Lottie almost hated him more for not hiding from it. Hank looked at Daniel. And I let you grow up under it. Daniel turned away. Lottie wanted to speak, but the words would not come. Forgiveness was too large. Rage was too old. All she could do was stand there while the truth arranged itself in a room that had waited 4 decades to hold it. Hank's hand moved weakly toward the blueprint. But before the report, he said, Eli knew they'd burn the files. He told me B-17 was being pulled for scrap after the accident. He said the fan had to remember if men wouldn't. He had the blueprint. I had the key to the south maintenance bay. Earl had a torch. Lottie's breath caught. Earl? Hank, Daniel said. Are you saying Earl helped seal it? Earl didn't know everything, Hank whispered. Only that Eli wanted the shaft closed and not melted. I held the light. Earl welded the collar. Eli had already marked it. Lottie saw the 3 men in her mind, not as heroes in a clean story, but as frightened working men hiding paper in iron because every official drawer had already betrayed them. Eli was alive when it was sealed? She asked. Hank looked down. Yes. The word broke something in her. Not because it changed his death, but because it gave Eli back in action. He had not only died warning, he had prepared. After the accident, Hank said, they came for his locker, his notes, his drawings, anything with his handwriting. I told myself the blueprint was safe in the machine. I told myself I would speak when the right person asked. Lottie's voice was low. And no one did? Hank looked at her. You did. At the funeral. With your eyes. And I looked away. That was the apology beneath all others. Not enough, but real. Lottie left the rest home with Daniel silent beside her. They did not go home. They went to her kitchen, where the blue composition book still lay wrapped in oilcloth beneath flour sacks in the pantry. Her hands knew where it was before her mind did. She opened it on the table. Dates. Times. Injuries. Names if she had them. Supervisor present. Words spoken before someone corrected the injured man. Daniel sat across from her, reading pages from a childhood he had never been allowed to understand. Cal Redding left-hand crush South Intake Cleaning Supervisor said crate accident. Moses bell sleeve pulled forearm laceration said fan grabbed him before Mr. Mercer entered. Toby Wills 2 fingers missing signed report before treatment. Samuel Greer eye injury cotton dust surge line running without guard. 1 page became 6. 6 became 12. 12 names. 12 men whose pain had been translated into their own fault. Lottie covered her mouth with one hand. For 40 years, she had kept the notebook because she could not bear for Eli's last word to vanish. But Eli had not been asking only to be defended. The blueprint and the notebook did not point to one grave. They pointed outward, toward kitchens, children, widows, unpaid bills, hands that never closed right again. Daniel read the last entry twice. Then he looked at his mother. He wasn't just trying to clear his name. No, Lottie said. And finally, she understood the word the way Eli had left it. Guard was the missing part of the machine. Guard was the duty the factory had abandoned. Guard was what a frightened supervisor had failed to do. Guard was what Lottie had been doing all along without knowing the size of it. She closed the blue notebook and placed her palm on top of it. For the first time since the auction, she did not think of selling the fan, or saving the house, or proving that Eli had died innocent. She thought of 12 families who had been taught to be ashamed of wounds they did not cause. By Friday at 5, Celia Frame expected Lottie to surrender the fan and the paper inside it. Instead, Lottie took out a sheet of stationery and began writing names. At the top, she wrote, "People who deserve to know." Lottie did not choose the courthouse. She did not choose the town hall, either. Both places had too many polished floors and too many men who knew how to make suffering sound procedural. Instead, she asked Earl Maddox to unlock the old Union Hall on Mercer Street, a narrow building with peeling white paint, a sagging porch, and a meeting room that still smelled faintly of dust, coffee, and pipe tobacco. It had not held a proper gathering in years. That was why Lottie wanted it. The truth did not need marble. It needed witnesses. By Thursday evening, 12 folding chairs stood in 2 uneven rows. Earl set a card table near the front and placed the covered blueprint on it, still protected under glass. Daniel brought the blue composition book in a grocery sack and carried it like something heavier than paper. At first, Lottie thought no one would come. Then headlights appeared. One truck, then another, then a sedan with a cracked windshield. Then an older woman in a church coat, helped up the steps by a grandson who looked confused and protective. They came quietly, suspiciously, as if each had been invited to reopen a wound they had spent half a lifetime pretending was scar tissue. Cal Redding's daughter came. Moses Bell's widow came. Toby Wills came himself, leaning on a cane, his left glove folded flat where 2 fingers should have filled it. Samuel Greer's niece came with a shoebox of old medical bills. By 7 o'clock, every chair was taken. No one spoke much. They looked at Lottie, then at Daniel, then at the covered glass on the table. Lottie stood in front of them with the blue notebook in both hands. "I asked you here," she said, "because my husband was not the only man that factory taught this town to blame." The room shifted, not loudly. A coat sleeve rustled, a chair leg scraped. Someone drew in a breath and held it. Lottie opened the notebook. She did not begin with Eli. She began with Cal Redding. The 12th of April 1977, left hand crushed, south intake cleaning, supervisor present, reported as crate accident. A woman in the front row closed her eyes. "My father said it wasn't a crate," she whispered. Lottie looked at her. "I know." Then Moses Bell, the 3rd of June 1978. Forearm laceration. Sleeve pull. Moses Bell's widow pressed a handkerchief to her mouth. "He wouldn't tell me. He just said not to ask again." Toby Wills lifted his flat glove. "They said I reached in," he said. His voice shook, not from weakness, but from the effort of holding back 40 years of being called foolish by men who had never stood near that line. "I kept saying it pulled me. Nobody wrote that down." "I did," Lottie said. That was when the room changed. Until then, people had come carrying private shame. Each family thought their father, husband, uncle, or brother had been the careless one. Each had been handed a report, a small settlement, a warning not to make trouble or nothing at all. Each had believed their pain was separate. Now the names began to touch, one after another. 12 entries, 12 injuries. Same line, same missing guard, same kind of report. By the time Lottie finished, nobody was looking at the floor anymore. Daniel stood behind her, his face pale. He had heard parts of the story. He had seen the blueprint. But this was different. Paper in a shop could prove a lie. Voices in a room could reveal what the lie had done. The back door opened. Every head turned. Earl Maddox came in first, pushing a wheelchair. Hank Mercer sat in it with a blanket over his knees and a notarized envelope on his lap. A low sound moved through the room. Not welcome. Not forgiveness. Recognition, sharpened by anger. Toby Wills tried to stand. His niece held his arm. Hank did not ask them to be kind. Earl pushed him to the front and stopped beside the card table. Hank looked smaller under the hanging lights than he had in Lottie's memory, but his voice, when it came, carried enough for everyone to hear. "My name is Hank Mercer," he said. "I was floor supervisor on the south intake line." No one answered. "I signed reports that blamed men in this room and men represented by families in this room. Some of those reports were false. Some I knew were false when I signed them." A woman near the back said, "Why?" Hank closed his eyes. "Because I was afraid losing my job would ruin my family, and because the company taught me to believe another man's ruin was cheaper than mine." The words did not soften the room. They hardened it. That was right. Lottie watched him take the envelope from his lap. His hands shook so badly, Earl had to steady it. "This is my sworn statement," Hank said. "Names. Dates I remember. Who ordered changes. Who removed the guard. Who told us to use the old language in the new reports. I don't expect forgiveness. I waited too long to ask for that." He looked at Daniel. "I owe your father more than I can pay." Daniel's face tightened. For one long second, Lottie thought her son would turn away. Instead, Daniel said, "Then pay what you can." Hank nodded. That was all the forgiveness the room could bear. The front door opened again before Earl could take the envelope. Celia Frame entered with Alden Voss behind her, and a deputy Lottie recognized from the courthouse. Celia's eyes moved over the gathered families, the notebook, the covered blueprint, and Hank Mercer's wheelchair. "This meeting needs to stop," she said. No one moved. Celia looked at Lottie. You are displaying proprietary material in violation of formal notice. Daniel stepped forward before his mother could answer. You mean evidence? Celia turned to him. Mr. Brunner, I strongly advise you not to involve yourself further. I'm already involved, Daniel said. My father's name is on your lie. Alden's face tightened. Careful. Daniel looked at him. No. That's what you counted on. Careful men. Careful widows. Careful workers signing whatever kept food on the table. For the first time in his life, Daniel Brunner sounded like a man no longer asking permission to believe his own father. The deputy shifted uncomfortably near the door. Then a woman in the second row raised her phone. I called Mr. Alvarez, she said, the attorney from Fairmont. He's on his way. Another man said, Reporter 2. Celia's expression changed. Not much. Enough. Lottie lifted the glass cover from the blueprint, just far enough for the room to see the title block. South Intake Guard. Original Safety Specification. Bay. Tubeless. She did not let anyone touch it. This does not belong hidden in my house, she said. And it does not belong back in theirs. When the attorney arrived 20 minutes later, Hank gave him the sworn statement. Lottie gave him copies of the notebook pages. Earl gave him the photographs of the shaft, the seal, and the marks under the collar. Daniel signed as a witness. Alden Voss left before the reporter finished writing his name. Celia stayed long enough to say nothing useful. By the end of the night, no one had been paid. No lawsuit had been won. No apology had repaired a hand, a marriage, a lost pension, or a boyhood spent under shame. But 12 families walked out of the Union Hall carrying something they had not carried in decades. Not victory. Not yet. A common truth. And for the first time, Lottie understood that the fan had not been waiting for her alone. It had been waiting for all of them. By the time winter settled fully over Brunner County, the lawsuit had not been won. Not yet. That mattered to some people. It mattered to lawyers, reporters, insurance men, and company officials who suddenly found themselves using careful language in public meetings. It mattered to Brunner Textile Systems, which announced an internal safety review with the kind of statement that admitted concern without admitting guilt. It mattered to families who had waited decades for records, compensation, and names restored to files that had once called their fathers careless. But to Lottie Mae Brunner, the first victory was smaller. The fan did not disappear. That was what she had feared most. That some clean-handed person would place it in a truck, wrap the blueprint in legal language, and make the whole thing vanish behind a locked door again. Instead, the court allowed the shaft, blueprint, photographs, and Hank Mercer's sworn statement to remain preserved through an independent attorney. Earl Maddox prepared the fan for dismantling under witness. He did not do it quickly. He moved around the old machine with a patience that looked almost like apology. Daniel stood beside him that morning. So did Lottie. So did Toby Wills, wearing his flat glove. So did Moses Bell's widow. So did Cal Redding's daughter, Samuel Greer's niece, and others who had once thought their family's shame belonged to them alone. Earl cut nothing until every angle had been photographed. He marked the blades. He tagged the collar. He wrapped the shaft in cloth and sealed it in a long evidence crate. When the lid closed, Lottie placed one hand on top of it. For 40 years, that shaft had held the truth because people had failed to. Now, people would have to hold it. The blades were handled differently. They were not valuable in the way collectors used that word. They were scarred, warped, and ugly with old heat. But Earl cleaned them, cut them into 12 small pieces, smoothed the dangerous edges, and stamped each one with 2 marks. B-17, and the name of a worker from Lottie's notebook. No ceremony was announced. No brass plaque was ordered. There was only an afternoon in the old Union Hall, coffee and paper cups, and families standing in a line to receive pieces of a machine they had once been told had only hurt them because their fathers had been foolish. Toby Wills held his piece in his right hand. His left glove hung empty. He looked at Lottie and said, "All these years, I thought I reached wrong." Lottie shook her head. "No," she said. "They wrote it wrong." He closed his eyes then, not crying loudly, just letting one sentence arrive 40 years late. Hank Mercer did not live to see spring. His statement did. No one in Brunner County called him a hero after he died, and Lottie was grateful for that. Some men did one right thing too late to be cleaned by it. But late truth was still truth, His sons sent a note to the union hall saying they had not known. Lottie believed them. She also knew not knowing did not erase what knowing had cost others. Daniel changed most quietly. He stopped flinching when people said his father's name. At the hardware store, when an old customer muttered that the Bruner case was stirring up trouble, Daniel set a box of screws on the counter and said, "Trouble was already there. My mother just opened the shaft." The man did not answer. That was enough. 2 weeks before Christmas, Daniel came to Lottie's house with a furnace repairman and paid him before Lottie could reach for her checkbook. She argued, of course. Mothers did. He let her argue until the repairman left. Then he stood in the kitchen listening to the furnace catch, rumble, and finally push warm air through the vents. "You should have let me help sooner," Daniel said. Lottie looked at him. "You were helping the best way you knew. I was afraid you were disappearing into Dad's death." "I almost did," she said. "Then I found out he had been trying to lead me out of it." Daniel did not speak for a while. On the table between them lay the small piece of fan blade Earl had saved for their family. It was no bigger than Daniel's palm, dark gray now, edges smooth, stamped with E, Bruner on one side, and B17 on the other. Lottie pushed it toward him. "This belongs with you." Daniel shook his head. "It was yours." "No," she said. "The grief was mine. The truth is yours too." He picked it up carefully, as if it were not metal but something alive enough to bruise. In the front room, an old photograph of Eli sat on the mantel. For years, Daniel had passed it with the guarded politeness people give to pain they do not know how to touch. That evening, he walked to it and placed the piece of fan blade beside the frame. Eli Bruner looked out from the photograph in his work shirt, one hand raised against the sun, smiling at something outside the camera's reach. Daniel stood there a long time. Then he said, very softly, he didn't make the mistake. Lottie came to stand beside him. "No," she said. "He tried to stop one." Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall over the old gin, over Earl Maddox's shop, over the Union Hall, and over the road where a company car had once come before sunrise with a blank check. Inside Lottie's house, the furnace kept running. Warm air moved through the rooms with a low, steady breath. And on the mantel, beside Eli's picture, a piece of the broken fan caught the lamplight. It had been called scrap once. Lottie never corrected that. She only knew some scrap remembered better than men. And sometimes, if someone stubborn enough carried it home, it could teach the living how to remember too.